clairaudience. Ilan's voice sounded quietly over the room as she cast the spell through a mirror of remote viewing. "This is actually going to be worth casting this time, right?" she asked after she reseated herself. "I may as well have not used it at all for that last run." Einsak grunted at what was probably a rhetorical question. The silver rank exam that had preceded the current exam was nothing more than a formality by Mary's estimation, and it had been exactly that. The ranger examinee, Ludmilla, simply stalked by everything undetected, bypassed all of the traps and killed the boss at the end with a well-placed broadhead arrow from over 100 meters away. The giant crocodile bled out within a few minutes, never knowing what had killed it. It was a test meant for a group, defeated by a single, patient hunter. The only sound transmitted by the spell was at the end, after she had descended to the next floor and asked if there was anything more. "It's a group," he told her, "so they should be communicating with one another most of the time. You're up next, Blair." Life Essence. Mana Essence. Glowing auras appeared over the party members being observed, representing the relative condition of their health and mana. The auras were overlaid over one another, yet somehow the observers could clearly discern both at the same time. The druid nodded over to Aura and Mare, who were standing to the side of the assembled proctors, one for each role represented in the party. Except for one. There was a bard seated with them, who was one of the gold ranks present at their disastrous first showing outside of the city walls. After reading over the party composition, and who he was supposed to be monitoring, he looked about as confused as the others when they had gone over the briefing materials as well. Testing, why am I the one doing the talking, Mare? B, because you like doing it, big sis? You're always the one doing this kind of stuff, anyways. Aura frowned at the answer, and Mare shifted away with a timid look. After peering at her brother suspiciously for a moment, she turned back to address the figures in the mirror. She cleared her throat. "We'll be trying something new today, so this'll be a test in more ways than one. Ludmilla will be in charge of the party, and don't die." The party members in the mirror exchanged glances, except for the suddenly in charge Ludmilla, who was trying to not make eye contact with anyone. Mag, their rogue, looked up. "Since this is an experiment," she asked, "what happens with our points?" "Even though it's an experiment," Aura told her, "it's still a test, so you'll still be taking a hit to your points if you fail. Reses are the same deal, too. No pressure." There was visible consternation between the party members. Einsak couldn't blame them. Failure in training runs resulted in a penalty to each participant's running point tally. It had been worked out to roughly what a party would experience in losses of supplies and other materials if they failed a job that took a week to do. The penalty for resurrections scaled up according to rank, starting at 10% of the cost at silver, eventually becoming full cost at adamantite. Not that they had any tests higher than gold yet. However, with equipment and consumables now provided through the point system, as well as the frequency of training, they found that the penalties stung enough that the trainees ended up treating each run about as seriously as could be expected. "I still don't get why I'm here," the bard, Vincent, said. "I mean, I get why you brought me here, but I don't think I have anything to do with what this briefing claims." "You're the closest thing we have," Einsak replied. "This branch has had noble adventurers in the past, but, beyond the ones who were adventurers before becoming nobles, the rest were in name only. I got no clue how they work. At least a bard with group-enhancing abilities might be able to notice things that we don't." "Yeah, I'll be sure to note when she does paperwork off-key." Vincent looked down to his desk where the briefing lay spread out before him. "I have no idea how noble abilities work. Hell, I didn't even know nobles had abilities until I read this thing." Einsak scratched his head, as Vincent still appeared unconvinced. Even he wasn't really sure what to think of it all. Everyone had some sense that nobles had certain things they were good at, and frontier nobles were distinctly frontier nobles for some intangible, yet non-negotiable, reason. No one really explored why it was. Nobles had their own things to do, and adventurers in general didn't really care since it wasn't something they had to deal with directly. In other places, where the spare children of nobles sometimes became full-time adventurers, they participate as the common vocations that were associated with adventuring. A cleric, a fighter, a wizard, or a ranger, in Ludmilla's case. But you never had a noble sign up at the reception desk saying that they'd be a noble. Well, it wasn't actually unheard of, but those particular nobles were politely turned away, coming across as being pretentious, overbearing and obnoxious. Not to mention that it was considered suicidal. Nobles belonged in their manners, performing administrative tasks and managing their little corner of the kingdom. The examinees were also trying to figure out how things would work with the unforeseen change. All things considered, it was a confused mess. Seems like half of them didn't take well to being told that, Mocknich remarked. We adventurers pick leaders ourselves, that part hasn't changed even though a lot of other things recently have. We're not some retinue or army where butlers or sergeants are set over us. The veteran of the Erantal Adventurer Guild was right, of course. Adventurers were fiercely independent and free-spirited, and having someone put over them arbitrarily was sure to invite an adverse reaction. Respect between them was not granted as a matter of course, it was earned. This was being made clear before the observers right now, with Henrich, Penn and Mag voicing their doubts over the decision rather plainly. The party had been purposely chosen because they were mostly well acquainted with one another, yet it had still become a problem. Frontline combatants, who were capable of anchoring their team during a fight, tended to have the best sense of how combat was flowing around them and what shots could be called without breaking their party's formation. As such, they more often than not were accepted as party leaders in a profession that often saw sudden, pitched battles. Bards, too, could rise to a position of leadership as their broad set of abilities altered the dynamics of the group and could be employed to orchestrate the flow of combat. It was commonly accepted, up to this point, that strikers, supporters and ranged combatants were best left to focus on performing their specific roles rather than becoming distracted by additional responsibilities. Though they were perfectly capable of melee combat, Ludmilla was recognized as a ranger, and rangers were usually perceived as ranged combatants and scouts. With their often being too far away to communicate properly, it simply did not lend well to a leadership role in conventional adventurer parties. Much had changed with the Sorceress Kingdom's Adventurer Guild, yet much was very difficult to change. Party practices, taboos, preconceptions and overarching traditions would all take time to shake off, if they ever were. Well, it is a trial, after all, Jocelyn said. If we stubbornly stick to tried and true, we'll never learn anything new. The training area manager thinks that one of our members can be used as a commander, and we can explore that idea in a controlled environment here. The silver rank party in the mirror of remote viewing seemed to have reached the same general conclusion as well. They made their way inside the surface entrance and down the spiraling stairwell to reach the nexus where trials appropriate for their exam rank started. From there, the rogue went on ahead of them to reconnoiter the crypt-like passages ahead. The current exam reflected what the proctors considered a relatively light gold rank training session, but it was also at this point that the first major challenges to an adventurer's perception started. While copper to silver rank training was relatively straightforward and simple, consisting of experiences and concepts that could be related to by the everyday individual, gold marked where common sense started to make less sense. Adventurers gained in strength at a pronounced rate past this point, as did their adversaries. Martial arts became far more frequent and all sorts of things started to use extraordinary and supernatural abilities, often employing increasingly powerful spells. The level of complexity and encounters exploded as the avenues of possibility expanded in all directions. It was the first step an adventurer took beyond the mundane world of regular people, where adventurers learned just how far away the realm of heroes really was, and that the histories so romantically regaled by the bards were not as preposterous as cynics would have others believe. Between all of the Adventurer Guild veterans and the Sorcerer King's vassals that had been assigned to work with the training area, it was agreed upon that this would be the starting point for when their curriculum truly started to become a challenge. It was the minimum qualification for expeditionary work, so they would need to be schooled broadly. The gold rank exam would give them a taste of what was to come, but it was still considered manageable. I can't help but think you really hate us scouts, Mary said from where she was standing near Aura and Mare. There must be some way to make this part better. Weren't you the one that suggested doing this? Eintzak arched an eyebrow at her. Well, yeah, she furrowed her brow, but you guys agreed and I can't help but get annoyed watching. In one mirror, the one without additional sensory enchantments, Mag was sneaking around, covering the routes that led through the exam area. Single route training sessions ended at gold, and the scout would have to perform reconnaissance over several possible routes. As it was a part of each session past this point, higher rank runs took much longer to complete. The scout would ideally report back to their party, where they would together determine the best route and what methods could be used to overcome the various challenges identified. The dungeon this time split into 3 paths. The 2 side paths held chambers that gave a clear view overlooking the central path, and each of these side chambers had a dozen moderately weak skeleton mages in them. The central path had a large group of stronger zombies that would tie up anyone that tried going through the middle. Immediately trying to advance through the zombies would draw the attention of the skeleton mages and pelt the adventurer party with magic from both sides. At the rank intended, no one would fall for that sort of trap as long as they scouted ahead in advance. The party would have to go up the sides, to clear the ambush first. While the skeleton mages being used were only capable of casting spells of the first tier, going about it recklessly would still result in taking a fair amount of damage. If one was careful. What is she doing? Ilan sat up in alarm, clutching the edges of her desk. An arrow flew out and struck one of the zombies in the central chamber, who turned to look in the direction of the attack with the shaft buried in its head. Ludmilla and the rest of the party were out in the open, standing slightly inside the central hall, adjacent to the junction between the 3 paths. The ranger loosed another arrow, and the zombie collapsed. The noise alerted the undead in all 3 chambers, and they started to converge on the party. Arrows and crossbow bolts continued to fly out from the party with the fighters forming a defensive line, oblivious to the skeleton mages now running down the side halls towards them. The proctors leaned forward as one at the incomprehensible action. The party knew what was waiting, yet they chose to ignore it. "This is suicidal," Jocelyn stated. "She just made things 10 times harder for them." 4 more of the advancing group of zombies fell before the small swarm reached them. Henrich and Kyla switched to their shields and melee weapons, while Mag continued to release crossbow bolts into the zombies from behind the 2 fighters. "This is going to be so ugly," Blair said. "It's so much unnecessary damage." The 2 groups of skeleton mages started to round their respective corners at the same time, and Themis raised her holy symbol high above her head. "My lord Sursana, god of death," her voice rang out, "return our foes to your embrace." A wave of divine power washed out from the cleric of Sursana, and 24 skeleton mages were reduced to ash in an instant. The remaining zombies turned around and shuffled away. The 2 fighters set upon them, cleaning up the fleeing undead in short order. "Turn undead is such bullshit," Blair muttered sourly to the side. The rogue headed out again while the group recovered their spent ammunition, and the assembled proctors exchanged looks with the action abruptly ended. "That's our bad, I guess?" Moknich seemed amused. "The Adventurer Guild only has 2 clerics, and Themis is the most powerful one we have at the moment. Just an oversight, yeah?" "Got to admit," Mary said, "that was pretty neat. It's not often that you get to see that many undead go poof at once, actually." "Why was that even a surprise?" "I didn't hear anything until the fight started." "Did your spell go wonky?" "My spells don't go wonky," Ilya sniffed. "I've been maintaining clairaudience ever since we started. We didn't hear any of their planning because they didn't say anything after the rogue reported her findings. They all just stood around that ranger and nodded once in a while, then they all set up for the fight." "Can you do anything like that?" Einsak asked Vincent. I can do something that resembles a message spell," the bard answered, "but that requires a spell song, and I'm fairly certain she doesn't use those. Ventriloquism still requires me to say something, so clairaudience would pick it up. There are a lot of oratory abilities, it may be something along those lines, but I'm hard-pressed to think of anything else that lets you say something without saying anything." Maybe they were being really paranoid and had the cleric set up a silence spell before discussing their plans? Jocelyn presented a possibility. "No, that doesn't make sense," Moknich shook his head. "We've done that before, too, but why would they only do it after Mag reported her findings? It didn't look like their mouths were moving either." "We'll just have to ask after they're done," Einsak said while jotting down the mysterious ability on the page sitting on the desk in front of him. "Looks like the rogue is back." "That was fast," Jocelyn said. "Did she miss something? Hidden doors?" No," Mayor shook his head, "there's nothing like that this time." She just went through all the passages and disarmed the traps like it was nothing, Mary noted. That was a lot faster than the first set. It was about the same amount to cover, and I'm pretty sure I set them all to be around the same difficulty. The proctors frowned at the anomaly. Being able to watch the goings-on during the training sessions made many things obvious that would have not been otherwise. Having something genuinely mysterious or unknown occurring was actually quite rare.
Ah, I get it, Vincent said.
Get what?
Eintzak glanced at the bard.
The difference between bards and commanders, Vincent told them. Bards use a sort of magic that can bolster their allies and afflict their enemies, as well as a whole lot of other things. The same can be said for any other sort of similar support magic. You cast it on your group or your target and it works. Commanders, sergeants, generals, and the like, don't use magic. It's more like an ability or an aura or maybe martial arts. Anyways, it affects a lot more people, armies, literally, but the kicker is that only subordinates receive the benefits of a commander.
Ah,
okay? Blair said, that doesn't seem to matter here. They didn't sign up for her army or anything.
But they did,
Vincent said excitedly. Well, kinda. That fight just now was what did it. She coordinated a stunt that all of us thought was suicidal, and they breezed through it without a single scratch. They barely used anything, no potions, no mana, just a single turn undead. Before that fight, half of them probably didn't care for being told to let her lead, but now she's shown that she knows what she's doing, they're willing to follow, at least for the time being. That's why the rogue is breezing through everything. Mag's getting benefits from her commander now, where she wasn't before.
And somehow, this isn't a spell, Ilan scoffed.
It's not a spell like you'd have in tier magic, Vincent said, but it is something like magic, just like how martial arts are considered a warrior's magic. I suppose you might say the successful ploy just now was a spell of sorts. Once successfully cast, those who fall under her influence receive all of her benefits. As a bard, I can move my audience to tears or laughter or feats of valor with a song. As a commander, she can move those who subordinate themselves to her to greater levels of performance or coordination or whatever they're getting from her. Similarly, though, it is double-edged. If I mess up a performance I can possibly lose my audience, so may she lose the faith of her subordinates if she falls short somehow.
Are you really sure? Eintzak peered at him. I've dealt with nobles before, and, while some might be charismatic, none of them do anything like this.
Vincent's gaze turned inwards, and he tapped a finger on his desk in thought. Several moments passed before he replied. It makes a certain amount of sense to me, he said. Consider the old tales, from before Eastize, after the lands were ruined by the demon gods, a wilderness savage and untamed. Who was it that drove back the races of that frontier? The heroes of those days were not adventurers or mercenaries, but nobles, who led their retinues and armies, heading the charge and pioneering the foundations of the nation, what is now the heartlands of Reastize and the Empire. That is why most of the great houses in Reastize and Baharuth are styled in the manner of marcher lords. I've seen some of those marcher lords at the annual conflicts between Reastize and the Empire, Mocknich snorted. They might talk big and wear a shiny sword, but there's no way you can convince me that they're fighting men.
That's besides the point, really, Vincent said.
What matters is that, at one point, these nobles did exist in that capacity, commonly enough to enter into our cultural memory. Baroness Zaradnik is a frontier noble. Her house never stopped being those nobles from the early days. She is a song made flesh, one that continues its lonely tune to this day. Significance forgotten even as she walks amongst us, save for the intangible sense that she is different somehow. The bard was really beginning to wax poetic, but Eintzak still made a note of it. The world was certainly mysterious when it came to many things, but maybe this particular mystery could actually be tracked down in some rational manner. Still, the idea that humans could be naturally influenced by a noble in similar fashion to a demi-human lord influencing their tribe was hard to swallow, especially since adventurers commonly considered demi-humans uncivilized savages. Were humans really not as different as they thought? Perhaps this was one of the reasons why the Sorcerer King did not consider humans particularly special. I didn't hear anything again, Mary noted as the party set off. It probably doesn't matter, whatever they decide, Jocelyn shrugged. That first half was supposed to take up a lot more time and resources than they actually used. Now they're effectively going into this next part beyond full strength if what Vincent says is what's going on. Einsak nodded in agreement. The opening fight had specifically been structured to force the party to use a certain amount of their resources, even if they played things as carefully as possible. They hadn't expected that the party would, instead, crush it as aggressively as possible and render their calculations useless. The second part of the test had the crypt turning into a crisscrossing network of caves that eventually led to a grotto, where several ogres had volunteered to act as the final encounter. The caves had traps installed everywhere, and were guarded at intervals by various animals and monsters a gold-ranked party would expect to commonly encounter throughout their work. Even if they straightforwardly cleared a way through the caves, going into them with their enhanced strength meant that they should handily make their way through with more leeway than intended. Watching their mostly silent progress, the tactics seemed quite conservative, at least at first. As more of the passages were cleared, the team became so efficient that it almost seemed like play to them. Monsters were whittled away at range to be finished off by the fighters, lured into ambushes or cornered and systematically taken apart with little excitement or flair. Traps meant for the adventurers were used against their opponents instead to devastating effect. By the time they reached the exit of the cave system, they had perhaps used 2 healing potions and still hadn't cast a single spell. "I don't think those ogres are going to get what they signed up for," Ilan said in tones of pity. "Pen and Themis are just going to dump all of their mana on them once the front line ties them down. They're 3 and 3 too, Mag's going to have a field day." The ogres were part of the demi-human forces residing in the area around Carney village. There were always a few of them around Durantal, who came to fight in the adventurer training area to better themselves, or just have fun, depending who you asked. There were 4 in the grotto, 3 ogre berserkers and 1 ogre shaman. They were not the same as the ones that had fought the Adventurer Guild some weeks before during the battle outside of the city walls. Those ones had already grown stronger, but a new batch that were each individually about as strong as a gold-rank adventurer themselves. The demi-humans that came from Carney to participate always seemed stronger than they should have been, but, after witnessing firsthand the effects of a commander over their subordinates, Einsak decided that their extra strength must come from being under the bloody general. It would be one mystery solved, at least. Even so, he didn't think they would fare too well. They were supposed to be a challenging final fight for a battered adventurer party that was larger than them. As Ilan had predicted, the ranger, or was it the commander? He wasn't sure what to consider her anymore, put away her bow and pulled out a spear from somewhere. With their respective front lines occupied, the sheer magical power between Pen and Themis would come down like a hammer on the unsuspecting ogre group. Mag had already slunk out of sight as well, crawling along the ledge below where the ogres stood to position herself for sneak attacks. Einsak crossed his arms, awaiting the inevitable outcome as the 2 groups closed in on one another. The ogre shaman started casting a spell, but a sneak attack from Mag with her crossbow interrupted it. She ducked back under the ledge to reload while the shaman turned about trying to figure out where the bolt had come from. Meanwhile, the 3 ogre berserkers and the 3 adventurers occupied each other while Pen and Themis positioned themselves. Club-spattered shields and counter-blows from the 2 fighters returned the favor. The ogre-facing Ludmilla found itself pierced 3 times before it could reach her with a powerful overhead attack. She backed away with the incoming strike, positioning her polearm to receive the large club. Smash! The ogre's club snapped the spear like a toothpick, and the auras surrounding Ludmilla winked out. AE. Huh? What? How the? Lucky Tilda. At his cheery words, all heads in the room turned to Mare. Mare, Aura said with a frown, what do you mean by that? Didn't Big Sis say that her build might be messed up? Now we can Oh. Heiter, wows. Aura's hands came in from both sides, fingers pinching Mare's cheeks. Mary started to make fretful motions from the side. You. Aura growled at her brother, and she stretched out his face. You. What? Just because you started getting along with a girl doesn't mean you can just force her like that. How did my little brother become like this? It must be those women that keep spoiling you. I'm going to go and... Awawa. Hetty. What? Speak properly. You. Aura released her brother's cheeks, but continued glaring at him. Mare sniffed. It wasn't me. I didn't do anything. Huh? Aura pointed to the mirror, where the party was wrapping up the fight. They're not supposed to go squish like that? Explain.
I don't know. Everything should be normal. Mayor looked around the room with watery eyes that begged for someone to come to his defense. Einsack cleared his throat. I can safely say that that wasn't normal, he said. This one was planned out with extra care since we were testing something out, so there shouldn't have been anything amiss. If anything, everything went beyond perfectly until, that. In the mirror, a gate opened and Pestonia stepped out. After healing the subdued ogres, she walked over to where Ludmilla's corpse lay. Raised dead. After a moment, the noblewoman stirred. Einsack regretted that he hadn't contacted them before the spell was cast. Raised dead had been agreed on beforehand as the spell to be used to recover silver and gold-ranked adventurers. According to Pestonia, those revived through Raised Dead lost 4 levels or, in a more recognizable measure, roughly 12 difficulty ratings worth. The training area made it so that recovering from the loss in strength was relatively quick, as long as one participated earnestly. This being the case, they had decided on using the cheapest spell possible to free up more of their budget for crucial magical item purchases now that trade was flowing again. The way Ludmilla had died, however, was annoyingly unsatisfying and completely strange. If they had used a spell that restored her closer to her previous condition, a reasonably accurate assessment could have been made as to why she had died to what, by all appearances, should have been an easy attack to deal with. Her smoothly prepared defense indicated that she knew exactly how to handle it. Now, he wasn't sure if she was strong enough to keep her silver plate. Einsack let out a sigh, wondering if she could now even do anything that they had noted through the exam. This should be about right. He carefully examined his reflection, clad in black plate, one last time before turning to Narbril. Is there anything amiss? He asked her, anything different from Moman's most recent appearance? The battle maid, in the guise of beautiful Princess Nobby, bowed deeply upon being addressed. Ha, she affirmed. Your appearance is perfect as always, Einsummer. How can she even tell when she has her head down like that? His first attempt to go out into the city as Moman had been thwarted by his own doubts, with Albedo's report on his return raising all sorts of questions over whether he could manage carrying out the role without ruining whatever Pandora's actor had going on. When Ainz finally caught up with all of his work, he took the time to approach the doppelganger to see if he could figure out what he had done. What stage? What actors? Someday, I hope I can meet this mysterious Ainz-Ulgound person and ask him what exactly his great work is. He couldn't even try to fish out any details, out of the fear that Pandora's actor would ask him questions about this mysterious master plan in return. In the end, Ainz had resorted to observing Moman as he interacted with the citizenry, except he couldn't figure anything out from doing so. Moman was well received wherever he went, interacted with local leaders and commoners alike, and acted as the hero that everyone looked up to. Nothing seemed amiss or particularly noteworthy. The act was so perfect that he couldn't tell any of its pieces apart. Are you certain? He asked Narbril. If Pandora's actor has made any adjustments, however slight, the citizens may notice and issues will arise as a result. If anyone takes issue with your appearance, Einsummer, Narbril said, I will mark them to be incarcerated indefinitely by the authorities. That's not. He cleared his throat. Nobby, my objective is to seamlessly assume the role of Moman for a few hours. Any strangeness due to my appearance or behavior will conflict with this goal. Also, you should be addressing me as Moman now. Ha! She bowed even more deeply before straightening to speak. Pandora's actor has made no alterations to Moman's appearance, Moman's RN. So she can say it right. Wait, how did she screw it up in the same sentence? Well, there was no agonizing over it. His various experiments and attempts to streamline the setting-induced behavior of the NPCs to their new reality had convinced him that, rather than trying to force them into uncharacteristic changes, it was best to find roles that suited their natural settings. Cocytus' progress with the demi-human tribes of the Great Lake served as the springboard for the concept, and he had followed suit with various assignments along that vein. Albedo's settings made her an excellent head administrator for the Sorceress Kingdom. Pandora's actor fit in perfectly in his role as Moman, and the NPCs stationed in and around the city promoted various positive aspects that enhanced the reputation of the fledgling nation. Most recently, Shiltir had proven that this methodology was correct. Due to Canabel's portfolio, Shiltir,
as a cleric of that particular deity, had, in turn, demonstrated talent in logistics. If the NPC who was most often perceived as an agent of wanton destruction could be turned to such productive ends and naturally grow as an individual, Ines wondered what other gems he might be able to find hidden within the mountain of setting information in Nazarick. If I may say so, Momen Sa-en, Nabrul added as he started to drift away into the possibilities, Pandora's actor has involved himself heavily with the citizens in performing his various tasks according to your orders. While Momen's outward appearance has not changed, his degree of involvement with the people has. There are relationships that have grown over the months, and many new ones that have formed. Of that, I am aware. Out of consideration for his ongoing efforts, I will refrain from doing anything that will interfere with what he has planned. Ines chuckled to himself. I have become something of a doppelganger myself, don't you agree? Ha! A dispassionate expression appeared on Nabrul's face with her reply, and Ines berated himself inwardly. With only a single level in doppelganger, Nabrul did not possess the same range of abilities as the others of her kind in Nazarick. A bystander might say that he was singling her out over something she had no control over. He cleared his throat again in the awkward silence. According to my expectations, Ines told her, darkness has performed according to plan as a bridge between the Sorceress Kingdom and its citizens. That means you have done an excellent job as well, Nobe. Nabrul's expression lifted, and her eyes shone at his words. This one is unworthy of such praise. She lowered her head again. Thank you very much, Ain Momen Sa-en. And, just like that, a year of corrections over how she addressed him had rewound back to the beginning. He suppressed a sigh, wondering if he heard somewhere, somehow. Thankfully, as Pandora's actor had pointed out, the image that Nabrul conveyed as Nobe was not only remarkably popular, but also served as a powerful foil to the more friendly and heroic image of Momen. The perfect casting for the role, by the doppelganger's estimation. Ines could only thank his lucky stars that his selection had worked out spectacularly well in the end. Though Nabrul, with her downturned gaze, could not see it, he nodded regally out of habit. It's time to head out into the city. There are several things I wish to witness in person. Various subject headers in the endless march of paperwork he had been inundated with recently had caught his attention, and enough time working had passed that he finally felt that he could come up with some excuse to free himself for a few hours. Foremost among them was checking up on how the newly re-envisioned Adventurer Guild was doing, but that would come last due to their training schedule. He had expressed his curiosity over the new demi-human porter as well, but both Mare and Albedo insisted that they had only just finished with its basic layout and that he should visit when it was closer to completion and more worthy of being graced with his presence. It was a shame, considering that he wanted to see Yuri's orphanage as well. Aside from that, he wanted to personally experience the city at its most lively, to compare how things were relative to the time before his last visit to the Empire. For this, he had decided to go as Momen. Though he had walked the streets as the Sorcerer King together with darkness a few times now, people would make themselves scarce the moment they saw him, and he could not see what he wanted to as a result. At least it appeared that the streets were no longer as dreary as they once were. When's the last time I even went shopping around the markets? The answer was too long ago. It wasn't since he had last taken Momen's guise, before the annexation of Iranthal, that he had been free to peruse the strange and sometimes interesting things that could be found in this world. Going out into the markets was like hunting for rare treasure, something that he did not realize he would miss at the time. He had wanted to see the Imperial Ministry of Magic's exhibition as well, but they were now long gone. I haven't strolled around the markets for months now, he told Nabrul. Let's head to the main plaza first, shall we? Nabrul voiced her affirmative and followed him out of the solar of the former mayor's residence. The maids attending to the manor opened the doors ahead of them and, eventually, they found themselves before the main entrance. By the way, he said, what are today's security arrangements? In addition to the city's security forces, Nabrul replied, there are 10 Hanzos keeping an eye on our procession from the rooftops nearby. Aura, Mayor, and Sabos, as well as Bastonia, Negredo and Yuri Alpha can be called in at a moment's notice from where they are in the city. What happened to the usual 8-edged assassins? The streets have become too busy for them to be able to operate to an acceptable standard, Nabrul replied. Of course, we will bring them, if that is your command. No, it's fine Nobby, He held up a gauntleted hand. "We'll go with these arrangements." Too busy for eight-edged assassins? That was a promising sign indeed. He couldn't wait to see what it felt like for himself. They made their way through the roads of the central district, and Ines was greeted with the city's busy streets the moment he came into view of the gatehouse leading to the common area. Pedestrian and vehicle traffic streamed constantly in front of him, and it felt only a bit less lively than it was when he had first entered as an unknown stranger and received his copper plate. His illusory face smiled inside his helm at the sight as he joined the throng of people making their way around the city. For having the vast majority of their trade stem from the Empire, it was not bad. It was great, actually. Once the dwarves had re-established themselves and merchants started flowing from the west and south as well, he dared to imagine that Erantle would be far busier than before. The fearful faces of the people seemed nothing more than a distant memory, and everywhere he could see people of all ages and vocations going about their business, paying little mind to the undead maintaining security in the city. Ines felt many gazes fall upon him, far more than what he experienced at the height of his brief adventuring career. He nodded to himself. Pandora's actor had entrenched Momon's image even deeper in the eyes of the people, as he had ordered, but he wondered just how the popularity of the Sorcerer King was supposed to increase with all of this happening. It was decidedly strange how, so far, he appeared to be more popular with the dwarves than he was with most of his own subjects. At first, he believed that he should slowly acclimate the citizens to his presence and that of the undead as a whole, but progress was decidedly lopsided. Ines eyed several children playing in the shadow of a militia post, where an elder lich and Death Knight were silently looking on. What would happen if he traded places with one of his summons? Surely the children would run away, or their parents would hurriedly take them to safety. Brand awareness and market penetration, huh? It was an easily recognizable issue to anyone that had even a bit of experience in sales. If Death Knights were Brand A, Elder Liches were Brand B, and Ainzul Gaun, the Sorcerer King, was Brand C. Brand A and B, who had a visible presence as they served everywhere in large quantities, would gain widespread recognition faster and have more opportunities to make sales than C. He imagined that, if any merchant heading out from the Sorceress Kingdom were asked to describe an image that they considered ubiquitous to his nation, it would not have Ainzul Gaun anywhere upon it, just Death Knights, Soul Eaters, and Elder Liches. But how could he solve this? There was only one Sorcerer King. Merchandising? No, the last time I tried that, it flopped horribly. Actually no, the goal is not producing financial gains this time. Maybe this was why, throughout Earth's history, leaders had statues and portraits of themselves commissioned and their faces stamped on currency. Even so, the statue at the Great Lake made him cringe internally every time his eyes crossed over it, so what would it be like if such monuments were all over the place? He could almost feel Albert angrily shaking his fist at him as he mulled over the idea. As Ines contemplated the matter, his surroundings widened and he looked up to see that he had entered the main plaza. He took in the crowds that stretched to the ends of the space in both directions, milling through rows of stalls representing a myriad of merchants selling goods from every industry. The explosion of activity that greeted his senses was indeed a stark contrast to the dreary atmosphere from before. He looked left, then right, wondering which way he should go. Well, it did not take much to decide. To his left, stretching towards the Merchant Guild, were the stalls that presented more mundane wares for daily life and met the demands of the various industries within the city and its surrounding territories. To his right, towards the Magician Guild, Adventurer Guild, and Cathedral, the wares displayed were more to his interest. This placement was on purpose, of course, to catch the eye of those traversing from the above-mentioned locations, enticing them with magic items, arms and armor, alchemical consumables and the other goods and materials that saw demand by those organizations. He turned to his right and joined the slowly moving crowd, and people turned to greet the Dark Warrior cheerfully. Fortunately, none seemed to be willing to occupy him at length for the moment, so he could reply vaguely while browsing the merchandise on display. Gone were the dozens of adventurers reselling used and salvaged items at makeshift stands, as Erantle no longer served as a busy quest hub for the nearby region. In their place were more organized and well-stocked merchants dipping their toes in the vacated market for equipment. The items were, if he was to be polite about it, the best that the region could produce, and without the advanced resources from Yggdrasil, the best they could produce was equipment that he might consider suitable for low-level players.
Ease of customization through data crystals was non-existent, and magic items required specialized crafters and specific spells which may or may not be available from individual to individual. Durability was also an issue, with the best materials available being adamantite or its equivalent in wood or textile form. That being said, he had encountered more than a few interesting articles, though none approaching that of even a mid-tier item in Yggdrasil. There also existed spells in this world that produced effects that did not exist in Yggdrasil, and thus magic items that did not exist in Yggdrasil could also be created. With the fact that new magics could be researched and developed, the possibilities for enchanting were, in theory, limitless. And then there was runecraft. Gaundo and the other runesmiths whom he had acquired for the Sorceress Kingdom were still moving into Carney Village with their families, but Ainz greatly anticipated what the revival of their art would bring. The bulk of his investment in magical item production was focused on runecraft, as it could potentially create magic items without the costs associated with enchanting. I will have to come up with some way to market runecraft as well. All of his thoughts surrounding low-level magical items eventually led him to turn to look at the Adventurer Guild nearby. He had met with Ainz, along with Mer and Pandora's actor, several times since its repurposing. Equipment was one of the more pressing issues when it came to the nascent organization. No matter how hard their members trained and advanced in rank, the lack of suitable equipment presented a wall that was impossible to surpass. Beyond a certain point in levels, monsters and other potential adversaries started to manifest special properties that required magical equipment to effectively overcome. The opening of dwarven markets would alleviate this need for now, but it didn't mean that they shouldn't try to achieve better. Due to the nature of crafting in this world, however, it was an industry that was difficult to establish. The majority of demand for magic items in this world was actually for domestic applications, followed distantly by militaries that jealously guarded their sources. It was unlike Yggdrasil, where item production was mainly focused on supporting the combat-related aspects of the game. There was a veritable mountain of low and mid-tier equipment that had somehow collected in the guild treasury over the years, but Ainz felt that those items should only be awarded sparingly. Rare enticements dangled as valuable prizes at the very top of their new point catalogue. He spent another hour browsing through the market, speaking casually to various people and taking in the atmosphere of Eranthal. Finally feeling satisfied with what he had seen, he stepped out to the side of the crowd, looking at the sun directly above. It's about that time, he told Narbril. We should head over to the Adventurer Guild. No, the Expeditionary Office? There should be a fresh training session starting within the hour. He wasn't sure about calling the place where most of the Adventurer Guild's administrative functions were relocated to the Expeditionary Office. In truth, he liked the old terms better and the new vocabulary sounded too aggressive for what he had intended as an intrepid and romantic exploratory organization under the benevolent umbrella of the Sorceress Kingdom. Narbril opened her mouth to respond, but movement to their side turned her attention away. A woman in a green and white dress was walking straight towards them. For some reason, Narbril turned her head back to him and quickly looked him over. Her behavior struck Ainz as strange. Did she know who the approaching woman was? He quickly mulled over several possibilities. A clingy fangirl? A creepy stalker? An assassin? No, she wouldn't be alive to approach them if it was the latter. Still, something about this woman had put the battle maid on her guard. He turned to give the approaching individual his full attention as she closed the last few meters between them. It took a moment for the first solid thought to register in Ainz's mind. Tall. She was nearly of a height with him, which was rare to see amongst the humans in the region, never mind for a woman. He glanced down past her medium-length skirts. Maybe she was wearing heels. No. The only female human that he could recall surpassing this woman in height was Gagran of Blue Rose, who he had met back during the operation in the capital of Riestais. Ainz supposed that the warrior types that he had seen were often uncommonly tall when compared to others, yet this woman did not have the imposing and burly look of Gagran. Instead, she possessed a lithe figure and stride that more closely matched the graceful posture and movement of Nazaric's maids. Exuding confidence and charm, such a striking woman should have commanded the attention of those around her, yet no one seemed to notice her at all. Many things did not quite add up. It seemed that she had come from the cathedral, a member of the temples? Maybe a paladin. He understood that the class existed in this world from a few of the reports that crossed his desk, but he never really interacted with the local temples for the obvious reasons.
In addition, he had explicitly ordered the temples in the Sorceress Kingdom to be left alone, as they were essentially branches of a multinational corporation in this world. A single unfortunate incident could potentially result in international backlash, damaging the Sorceress Kingdom's reputation far and wide. He hoped she wouldn't preach at him. The woman glided to a stop a comfortable distance away. She smiled warmly, greeting them with a slight inclination of her head. "Good afternoon, Momen, Nobby," she said in friendly, mellow tones. "I hope the day finds you well." "Umu." He offered a neutral response to her greeting. It felt somewhat rude to do so, but he was preoccupied with trying to puzzle out just who this woman was. He did pay some attention while skimming over the reports that crossed his desk, but they generally did not offer personal descriptions of individuals, instead focusing on facts, figures, conjectures and projections. Pandora's actor interacted with so many people that she may not have even appeared on them in the first place. Out of the corner of his visor, he saw Narbrul give the barest of nods. "Woodlouse," she said. "Huh? That was something like one of her usual insults, right?" Ainz glanced back and forth between the two. Usually, when women came Momen's way, Narbrul would fend off perceived hindrances through projecting her smug superiority, cool intimidation and cutting attitude. Her current expression, however, was strictly neutral. The tone of her voice was not overtly hostile, either. Then why had she initially been on the defensive? She did not move to interpose herself between a potential threat or annoyance, so that meant, this woman was an acquaintance of darkness? "Is there something I can do for you?" he asked her. "I noticed the two of you when I was on the way out from the cathedral," she replied, "so I thought I would come offer my greetings, and my thanks." "Your thanks?" "Yes, for that matter." "Of course, that matter." "What matter? Someone tell me what's going on." The young woman's warm expression did not change in the slightest. She seemed entirely genuine. Narbrul offered no hints to him at all. It was no problem whatsoever. He decided to conclude the conversation before he sunk deeper into this unfamiliar mire. "I'm glad that I could satisfy your request." "I should have expected no less from the legendary Momen." She lowered her head in apology. "I hope you will forgive me for underestimating how thoroughly you could fulfill our desires." "Think nothing of it," he told her. "If you'll excuse us, we have an appointment at the expeditionary office." The woman seemed to think on his words for a moment before responding. "Of course. You must be observing the next training session. Please, do not be late on my account." The woman inclined her head once again, and Ainz breathed an internal sigh of relief. How did she even infer exactly what he would be doing with such confidence? Despite her polite manner, he had a feeling that she had directed the entire conversation from start to finish, and he had just mercifully been released. He turned and strode off to get away from her, but his steps froze when she spoke again. "Ah, Nobe?" "Yes, what is it?" "Your partner might be one to flit from branch to branch," the woman said lightly. "Please be sure to hold on to him tightly." Ainz turned back around at the cryptic words, but the woman was already walking away. She looked back towards them with the same friendly smile on her face and waved before disappearing off in the direction of the Merchant Guild. He looked over at Narbrul. They held each other's gaze for several moments before her eyes suddenly widened and she turned her head away, blushing furiously. What the hell just happened? Anyways, he forced his voice out, we should be on our way. Why yes, Momen Sa'en, Narbrul replied in a meek voice. They returned to the central district in silence, with Ainz resisting the urge to scratch his head furiously in confused frustration over the strange incident. It didn't help that Narbrul kept stealing surreptitious glances in his direction every once in a while. He couldn't ask her in public, as any number of people might overhear them, so he would have to find out when he went back to switch places with Pandora's actor. The thoughts were still tugging at him from a corner of his mind as they neared their destination. The expeditionary office, he really needed to have that changed, was one of the office buildings formerly occupied by the city administration. Albedo's restructuring of the territory's bureaucratic apparatus into a more efficient form cut down on the offices required from a half-dozen to 2, including the Royal Villa. With their need for additional space, the Adventurer Guild was allocated one of the vacant offices, facing the main promenade running through the central district.
Schiltier had recently claimed another for the new aerial transportation network. Though its limestone architecture still retained the pompous-looking embellishments with the same themes as the rest of the district, the only other thing that Ines could really say about the Adventurer Guild office was that it was clean. The staff that maintained the central district kept it in the same shape as every other government building, making sure the planters and beds were watered and stocked with blooming flowers. The Adventurer Guild hadn't come up with any emblems for itself yet, so the walls were bare of any banners. Every window was closed, their heavy curtains drawn tightly shut. The result was that the exterior gave off a ubiquitous aura, and the members of the guild were too busy implementing the new changes and training to care about the appearance of the office itself. Due to its prime location in Erantl's main plaza, the original branch office still served as the public-facing building of the new Adventurer Guild, but Ines still thought it would be best to improve every aspect of the organization's appearance for marketing purposes, even if it was just an administrative office. The solid oak door whispered open as they made their entrance, revealing an empty and unadorned foyer with an unmanned front desk. It appeared that the main floor was being renovated for something. Hallways were dusty and the walls were being taken down. Any laborers he might have been able to ask about the work appeared to be off for lunch, so he continued on his way. They climbed the stairs to the top floor where the observation rooms were located, stepping into the first open door. Several heads turned, immediately noting his entry. "Oh, if it isn't Moman," Mocknich's voice rose in surprised greeting. "You just missed a crazy one." The rest of the room's occupants looked up from their meals. It appeared that they were taking their lunch between observing the training sessions. Mocknich was the only adventurer he recognized. The remainder appeared to be newer members that had risen through the ranks and were now serving as proctors for lower-level training. The sight of these new faces was vaguely gratifying, as it was proof that his idea for building the foundation of the guild's membership through training offered by the Sorceress Kingdom was indeed producing results. The true result that he desired, that of the Adventurer Guild becoming an organization that truly explored, truly adventured, still seemed to only be a glimmer on the horizon, but progress was progress. The reports from Mayor, Pandora's actor and Einsack showed that the membership, though growing in numbers very slowly, was almost at a size where they had enough members to begin hammering out the workings of the expedition system. Even though the initial stages were probably not going to be very exciting, he still looked forward to witnessing it. It was here that he felt the most qualified to contribute ideas to, after all. "Oh, is that so?" Ines made his way into the room, walking in behind the row of tables facing the set of mirror remote viewing used to observe the proceedings. They were currently deactivated, so he could not get an inkling of what had happened at a glance. "What rank was the team?" he asked. "Silver," Mocknich replied, "was a brand new grotto run. On paper it should have been a steep challenge, but it was smashed mercilessly." Mayor went to take a look at the aftermath in person. The adventurer training area, after weeks of development, had expanded far beyond Ines's initial expectations. Mayor had thrown himself wholeheartedly into the project, shocking even Aura with his zeal. Beneath a large portion of Erantl's outskirts to the northwest was a massive facility which housed all manner of environments for the new Adventurer Guild to train in. Mayor was constantly refining and improving his work, creating the impression that the facility was constantly under construction. It changed on a regular basis, so every week the adventurers were faced with brand new layouts and challenges. "Grotto, Gem, did any demi-humans participate?" He set out a line, recalling how the themes loosely worked. "Yep, was Lizardman this time," Mocknich nodded. "They looked like a solid bunch too, a good balance of combatants, but, well, I'm not sure if they even know what hit them. With all the opportunities we've been given to train and learn, our members have gotten far better than ones of the same rank that we had in the past." "I'm sure His Majesty would be happy to hear that," Ines replied in a lively voice. "He has great hopes for the Adventurer Guild in the future." We're just getting started," Mocknich said as packed away the leftovers of his lunch. "I can't wait until we start seeing platinum teams at work. Gez still a bitch though. I don't know what we would have done if His Majesty hadn't opened up imports from the Dwarf Kingdom to us." The reported quality of the Adventurer Guild members was the main reason Ines had come to observe a training session. According to both Einsack and Pandora's actor, and now Mocknich, the performance of members under gold rank were already far beyond previous expectations. Low-rank adventurers were normally of dubious, non-uniform quality with a poor life expectancy, so he wanted to see with his own eyes how much they had improved relative to his own experiences with them. There was a patter of feet in the hallway, and Mare entered the room. "Did you find anything wrong?" one of the seated adventurers asked. "No, everything's working," Mare replied. "The next group is ready, so well, let's see how they do." Mare looked up at Heinz as he finished speaking. "I have my ring of non-detection equipped, so he shouldn't be able to sense me. Or at least that was the hope." Heinz looked down at Mare. "I came by to watch, I hope you don't mind my being here." No, it's okay. Then. Mare turned to walk over to activate the two-mirror remote viewing and pulled a clipboard out of his inventory. His eyes moved back and forth as he scanned over its contents before putting it away again. "They're about 5 minutes away. Does anyone have any questions? We have a fighter, rogue, bard, druid, monk and wizard for the second run. I hope we have the right proctors here." Heinz cheered Mare on silently in his heart. Speaking before others was often hard, and it should be doubly so for the timid dark elf who was the age equivalent of a human child. He nodded silently as Mare went through his last-minute checks before the session started. Running out of things to double-check, he finally turned to adjust the mirrors. What greeted Heinz was the fantastic vista of a verdant cavern system, an intricate natural dungeon that Blue Planet would surely gape in awe over. Clairaudience. One of the proctors cast the divination spell on the mirror focused on the main body of the party, and the sounds of the adventurers moving through the ferns and giant mushrooms in the cavern filtered into the room. They stopped in a sheltered position, and their scouts set off to perform reconnaissance. The second mirror focused on the scout, while the first continued to transmit the rest of the party as they discussed amongst themselves. "This is almost like I'm watching a live stream." No, it actually is a live stream of a real fantasy world. Heinz crossed his arms and raised a hand to cradle his chin as the session continued. The proctors leaned forward in their seats. When the action began in earnest, he could only stand and watch as he had to keep track of so many things happening at once. The adventurers, as reported, were far more skilled than the ones he remembered when he was climbing the ranks. And it was no wonder. The dungeon itself was so deadly and unforgiving that he thought that there was no way that anything they encountered on the field could be so severe. If this was Yggdrasil, the newbies running this dungeon would have cursed the shitty devs for overtuning it. The bitching on the forums would be endless. How many times would people wipe on this? Wait, doesn't that mean that these adventurers are actually more skilled than low-level Yggdrasil players? He supposed that it should be the case. These adventurers were career professionals in this world, not newbies playing for recreation. A particularly dangerous sequence of events triggered his emotional suppression, which he was thankful for, else he would have let out an embarrassing sound. Even though it was a party of low levels, the challenges they faced were so full of suspense that his attention remained riveted to the scenes unfolding before him. A part of him felt that it was a shame the Adventurer Guild's activities were treated as confidential. The Imperial Arena would definitely be put out of business if the Sorceress Kingdom exported this training as entertainment. 40 minutes later, the session ended with the adventurers barely eking out a win over the final showdown with the Lizardman. Though he didn't need to breathe, or had any way to, Heinz finally let out the breath he had been holding for half an hour. "If these get any more exciting," he said, "even members not assigned to be proctors will be clamoring to watch." "You got that right," Mocknage laughed. "That might be half the reason why we're looking forward to platinum training sessions. They're bound to be even better than this." Maybe we should add that as a perk in our recruitment efforts? Actually, I guess it already is, but it's hard to convey all this. "You said this morning's team smashed this exact same dungeon?" He recalled Mocknage's statement from earlier. Was it due to party composition, or something else? "They were roughly the same, save for a single position, so I bet you can guess who was there." Heinz had no idea who Mocknage was talking about. He focused on nothing in particular, putting on a contemplative pose. "I see, that one, then?" "Yup," Mocknage nodded as he looked down to take some notes. "That one." "Oh, for the love of, you two?" "Speaking of which." Mocknage looked up and to the side. "Mayor, this run should be around where you had it, right? The results from this morning were probably due to one person." "Why yes, that's right,
Mayor turned away from watching the recovery operations in the mirror. We'll be able to use this for a few days. I'll start working on the next one. The proctors offered their feedback on the new dungeon section in turn, after which discussion over the group's performance started in earnest. Not wanting to loom over the proceedings and interfere with their work, Ainz excused himself and left the expeditionary office together with Nobril.